The idea of a god being betrayed is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because by right, it should be impossible. Yet, this phenomenon is somehow still a common trope in fiction. I was 11 when I first read about Loki, and there was one glaring loophole I couldn't understand at the time. How did Loki betray Odin, who could see the future? After all, if gods are truly omnipotent, they should have foreseen the betrayal. But after years of confusion and months of research, I think I understand now, and the key is precisely what happens after a god is betrayed. But there is a problem. Before we can ask what happens when a god is betrayed, we have to first ask something far more disturbing. What if the god was never a god to begin with? What is the definition of a god? Richard Feynman believed that God is only used to explain what we don't understand, and when we discover how something works, we no longer need that God. Because there's a specific kind of fear that comes from the unknown. This fear vanishes the moment we can comprehend what we're looking at. A child afraid of the dark isn't actually afraid of the dark, they're afraid of what the dark is hiding. Neon Genesis Evangelion begins on the surface as a story about gods attacking humanity. Giant beings called the angels descend upon what remains of civilization, and the only thing standing between them and total annihilation are equally colossal mechs, the Evangelions, piloted by innocent teenagers. That framing alone was enough to get me hooked, personally, but Evangelion is ultimately not about the war. It's about the dark truth behind it. The angels are not divine, they bleed. I remember the unease I felt while watching episode 2 when Shinji killed his first angel, Sagil. There was something unsettling about it. You spend the entire episode being told this creature is an emissary of destruction, something incomprehensible, and something to be feared. And then it dies, its bluish-purple blood spraying all over the screen. It was something biological, something alive in the same way me and you are, which when you think about it is so much worse. Because if the angels are biological, then the organization built to fight them, NERV, isn't defending humanity against the divine. They're running an extermination program against something they didn't bother to fully understand. The betrayal in Evangelion isn't a single dramatic moment, it's a slow build-up throughout each episode. The secret organization SEAL has been orchestrating human history towards a predetermined end through a project called Human Instrumentality. This project is centered on humanity's progenitor, Lilith, who is hidden deep beneath NERV headquarters, and on Rei, who carries Lilith's essence. Gendo Ikari, NERV's commander and the main antagonist, has his own separate agenda in addition to SEAL's, which is also related to Lilith. Everyone in the story who holds power is using theology to justify what is, at its core, deeply personal obsessions. Gendo doesn't want to become a god, he wants his dead wife back, and the entire apocalypse is a projection of his grief. The horror of Evangelion isn't that the gods are cruel, it's that there are no gods. What we call angels are flesh, what we call divine purpose is an obsession. The rituals, the prophecies, NERV, all of it was built around lies and falsehood. And the betrayal, when it comes, doesn't feel like a classic betrayal of faith. It feels like the removal of an anesthetic. The slow build-up makes the horror of the dark truth dawn on you slowly, giving you goosebumps. The EVA units aren't machines. They contain blood, flesh, and, worst of all, living souls. There was never a clear line between the sacred and the biological. The thing humanity worshipped was also just a body capable of suffering. It feels like the show's director, Hideaki Anno, is silently asking us a question. What do you do when you discover the thing you built your whole life around was never what you thought? Not exactly a lie, but a misunderstanding that everyone agreed to keep because the truth was too disturbing to reveal. However, the characters don't respond with rage, they respond with collapse. Shinji doesn't fight back against the cosmic machinery closing in on him, he simply stops. He retreats into his inner world. After I saw that scene for the first time, it stuck with me ever since. The idea that the response to discovering your god was fake isn't anger, it's dissociation. If godhood was always just misunderstood science, then what exactly was betrayed when the truth came out? Not a god, but something more fragile than that. The need to believe that something, somewhere, is holding everything together. There's something Evangelion doesn't quite prepare you for, because Evangelion's betrayal happens at a civilizational scale. But what about when it's just two children who couldn't let go? Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is a story about two brothers who tried to bring their dead mother back. Edward and Alphonse Elric live in a world governed by alchemy, a scientific discipline that operates on a single non-negotiable principle, equivalent exchange. To create something, you must first give something of equal value. It's a system that, on the surface, feels surprisingly fair. A universe where everything has a price that can theoretically be calculated and paid. So the Elric brothers calculate the price to revive their mother. But their expectations never come true. Edward loses an arm and a leg. Alphonse loses his entire body, his soul bound to a hollow suit of armor by his brother's desperate attempt. The universe charged the full price and delivered nothing. Their mother was still dead. I was maybe 14 the first time I watched that scene. I remember being furious and indignant about the unfairness. I didn't feel this way because they had failed, but because they did everything correctly. They followed the rules. The rules just didn't make exceptions for their grief, utterly devoid of empathy. The wider story of Full Metal Alchemist expands on this premise to a national scale through a villain called Father, a homunculus who has spent centuries scheming to devour a god, to consume the entity called Truth, absorb its power, and become a complete, perfect being. Father's plan involves sacrificing an entire country's citizens as the price. His worldview is morally evil and repulsive, yet strangely logical. If equivalent exchange is the law, then technically enough sacrifice should purchase anything, even godhood. And here's where Full Metal Alchemist's betrayal diverges sharply from Evangelion's. In Evangelion, the betrayal is revealed to the characters from the outside, but in Full Metal Alchemist, the betrayal is revealed when the characters are about to achieve their goals. That the Godfather was trying to buy was never going to submit. Truth, the entity that enforces equivalent exchange, doesn't punish Father for overstepping his bounds as a mere mortal. It simply charges the full price. Everything Father had taken from others was returned all at once. A form of indifference more frightening than any act of divine wrath. Truth is an utterly impartial and indifferent god. However, there's a secondary betrayal woven into this story that I find even more unsettling than Father's downfall. Sloth, envy, greed, lust, gluttony, pride, wrath. The homunculi are Father's created children, each named after a deadly sin, but he never loved them, as for they were only tools in his eyes. Father created them from pieces of himself he wanted to discard, the aspects of humanity he found inconvenient on his path to godhood. He didn't betray them because he never acknowledged them as worthy of betrayal in the first place, and yet some of them served him for centuries. Greed's arc is the one that quietly broke me. The original Greed gathered a group of followers and rebelled against Father. In response, Father killed him and implanted his essence into Ling Yao, a human host who never asked for any of this. Two beings, one body. What follows is a slow, strange negotiation between two beings sharing a single existence, neither willing to surrender. But the small ways the original Greed eventually finds himself again, those hit harder than almost anything else in the story. He recalls the chimeras who died loyal to him. What Greed really wanted wasn't wealth or power, it was people, belonging. His greed was really just a cover for his loneliness. Playing God. This phrase usually implies excessive ambition, but Edward and Alphonse didn't try to resurrect their mother out of ambition. They were just traumatized children. The sin of their transmutation is the same as most human attempts at godhood, not pride, but grief. The Elric brothers just used pride as an excuse because grief alone wasn't a big enough reason to justify the attempt. But truth doesn't distinguish between them. The price is the price. It must be paid. And maybe that's the most brutal thing Metal Alchemist depicts about the relationship between humans and gods. We keep expecting gods to understand us, to empathize with our reasons, to notice that we were desperate, that we were young, that we were sorry. But the universe is impartial, apathetic even. It charges the full price, regardless. Here's a question that I personally can't give a clear answer to. If you love the world entirely through one person, if that person was the reason the world made sense to you, and the world took them anyway, would you still love the world? I want to say yes, and I think most people want to say yes. But I'm not sure if most people have actually thought about it deeply enough. However, Castlevania doesn't let you avoid this question. The series, based on the video game franchise, opens with Dracula, an ancient immoral being so powerful the sun itself had to be banished for his armies to march. One day, a young woman named Lisa knocks on the door of his magnificent castle. She wants to learn medicine, not for wealth or power, but to help the sick and dying in her village. Dracula could have dismissed her, just like the countless others before, but he doesn't. Something about her, the directness, the complete absence of fear, the way she looks at him like he's a problem to be understood rather than a force to be worshipped, touches his heart. So, he teaches her. She changes him, not by softening him, not by redeeming him in a fairy tale way, but by becoming the very reason he remained in the world instead of withdrawing from it entirely. They build a life together. He travels while she heals the sick. The villagers below his castle live in this strange uneasy safety by being close to something that could destroy them. But it doesn't happen, because she asked him to see them as worth preserving. The church arrests her while he's away. They burn her as a witch in God's name. In her final moments, she calls out to the sky, to Dracula, wherever he is, begging him not to hurt them, to be better than the people killing her. The crowd doesn't understand who she's talking to. They assume she's calling to Satan. What follows is not a villain origin story exactly. Dracula doesn't snap, he doesn't go mad in the same way as the previous gods, irrational and consumed by power. His response is colder than that, and far more frightening. He gives humanity 1 year to leave his lands, 1 year to evacuate. Then all hell breaks loose. He announces it publicly. He doesn't hide what he intends to do or why. And this awful dignity is the most unsettling thing about him. The betrayal in Castlevania is not a betrayal of Dracula by his wife. It's the betrayal of an unspoken rule. The quiet agreement that if you treat the world well, good karma will reward you. It's the same betrayal Edward and Alphonse felt kneeling in that transmutation circle. The rules were followed, the price was paid in full. He chose to be good instead of evil. Yet, how is he rewarded? His wife was burned on a stake by the church. What I find genuinely hard to watch in Castlevania isn't the violence, it's the moments when you glimpse Dracula's past, small details that suggested he had quietly and incrementally started to change himself for the better. Worst of all, the people rebelling against Dracula's rampage include his own sons, Trevor Belmont and especially Alucard. They understood their late mother's wishes and chose it over their father's. During the final fight, Dracula reaches a point where he stops trying to win, not because he can't go on, but because something changes in him. Whether it was a memory or a hallucination, he saw Lisa in that moment. It reminded him of who he was before all this death and destruction. And that reminder was enough for him to stop fighting. He doesn't die as a loser, but as his former self. I've thought about that ending more than I want to admit, because it suggests something radical about what betrayal does to a god. Dracula wasn't disproved by what the church did to Lisa like in Evangelion. He was instead redirected. The betrayal didn't expose his nature, it fed a part of him, the desire for absolute destruction. He was always capable of this. He was also always capable of loving the trivial and ordinary. Both sides were true. The betrayal didn't create a monster, it just made the kind version of him impossible to sustain. And that's the most unsettling thought Castlevania leaves me with. The difference between a savior and a destroyer might not be a question of nature at all. It might be a question of what they were shown. So, back to Loki, back to 11-year-old me. If Odin could see the future, why did he not stop it? I think the answer is that he could see it. I think he saw exactly what was coming, but he still let it happen. Because the alternative was admitting something uncomfortable, that the world he carefully constructed and presided over was never as secure as he claimed. That no matter how powerful he was, he couldn't build a world immune to betrayal. Acknowledging this felt worse than just letting the betrayal happen and facing it. In Neon Genesis Evangelion, in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, in Castlevania, they were betrayed by what they believed in. The angels that could be killed, truth that is utterly indifferent, the church that burned the healer. I think I understand now. Anyways, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.